It's an unprecedented step by the head of the Catholic Church, and in the eyes of most, it's long overdue. Pope Francis is calling top officials from around the world to the Vatican in February to talk about the sexual violence epidemic, both past and present, among their ranks. And earlier today, Francis met in Rome with leaders of the American Catholic Church on the issue and exchanged the president of the U.S. Bishops' Conference called, quote, lengthy, fruitful, and good. So, what came from that lengthy and fruitful meeting, you may ask? Well, Cardinal Daniel DiNardo said they, quote, prayed together for God's mercy and strength as they worked to heal the wounds, and they look forward to actively continuing their discernment together, identifying the most effective next steps. Unfortunately, they've been trying to identify those next steps for years now, and it seems like every day disturbing new information comes out. Just today, the Pope authorized an investigation into claims that West Virginia's bishop, whose retirement Francis just happened to accept today as well, sexually harassed adults years ago. And there was that Pennsylvania grand jury report documenting the sexual abuse and assaults of more than 1,000 children by hundreds of Catholic priests. And the Archbishop who accused Pope Francis and others, including Boston Cardinal Sean O'Malley, of covering up for ex-Cardinal Theodore McCarrick. McCarrick is accused of sexually assaulting and harassing multiple people, both adults and children, and has since resigned. Then overseas, a wide-ranging new report found more than 3,600 kids were sexually abused by more than 1,600 church workers over a period of 70 years in Germany. And closer to home, a priest who'd been working as a Boston hospital chaplain was charged with sexually abusing a young girl back in 2006. Cardinal O'Malley was among the leaders at today's meeting, but as head of the Pontifical Commission for the Protection of Minors, he found himself in hot water earlier this week when he told Vatican News that his group is not a body that deals with past cases or particular instances of abuse, rather prevention. Joining me now are Mitchell Garabedian. He's represented thousands of victims of church abuse, including some whose cases prompted that Pennsylvania grand jury investigation. Mitchell, thanks for being here. And Barrett Doyle, co-director of the group bishopaccountability.org. Nice to see you, Ann. And Michael Resendez, who, as you know, was a member of the Globe Spotlight team during their investigation. Mike, it's good to see you. Will today's meeting in the Vatican change anything, Mitchell?
No, not at all. They're in panic mode. They don't know what to do. They're going to portray themselves as the victims at this meeting in 6 months.
What does that mean, victims?
It's about them. It's about the bishops. They don't know how to investigate themselves because they can't investigate themselves because they don't care about helping victims. They're in panic mode. The Pope already made some statements yesterday in which he said you have to pray for the bishops. Satan is coming after us. They're already portraying themselves as the victims. That's their new line. That's the image shaping. The victims are not really clergy sexual abuse victims, according to them. The victims are the bishops. We're dealing with a corrupt criminal entity.
Is that your perception of this, Anne?
I certainly haven't seen any bishops or religious superiors who've been heroes in all this. I think that the revelations are finally happening so fast the church can't contain it anymore.
Are they in panic mode?
They are in panic mode. I think that's accurate.
What does that mean to you, panic mode?
Well, what that means is that I'm hoping it finally means there may be some reform coming out of this Pope, but he has no sign, he's given us no signal that he's willing to do that.
You know, obviously what you and your colleagues and advocates and survivors did not so long ago in Boston was a tipping point. I assumed, maybe naively, that Pennsylvania was another tipping point. Was I wrong? Was I naive?
Well, I don't think you're naive. Pennsylvania may be another tipping point, but I think what's important to understand is Pennsylvania is no different than Boston, no different than Tucson, no different than Los Angeles, than Australia, than Chile. Pennsylvania is the same story, and it's the same everywhere. Everywhere the Catholic Church has a major presence, and anywhere the Catholic Church has a major presence where there's an investigation, this is what we're going to find.
Right.
I want to talk about what goes on inside the church or what will or will not go on. I want to talk about the outside world. It seems to me that at least Pennsylvania has prompted behavior from dormant public officials. Attorneys general have awakened. They're doing investigations.
That's the big shift. You know, the Me Too movement has awoken prosecutors to the institutional cover-up in the Catholic Church in the U.S. and across the world. We have never seen this amount of accountability coming from outside the Church as we have in the last year.
You're not in agreement with that?
What you're seeing is, and I've been saying this for decades, The public is being made aware. You have to protect your children when they're in the custody of priests. The church has circled the wagons, but the public is having their level of awareness raised here. And they're aware, wait a minute, I should not let my child alone with a priest.
Is there any, harkening back to what Mike said a minute ago, is there any reason to assume that there's any diocese, well, you've been doing the research forever, is there any reason to assume any diocese is corruption, abuse-free?
No, I mean, some are better than others.
Well, I'm sure.
There are some bishops that I think, are genuinely disgusted, but no bishops have been models of transparency. Some have put out lists of credibly accused priests. That's significant. That should be commended.
I think
wait, here and there, what?
I respectfully disagree. I think
With which?
It's rotten to the core. All of the bishops, all of the dioceses. I represent victims from 14 different countries, hundreds of victims from outside of the United States. You take away their religious garb, you take away the religion, they're a bunch of criminals who sexually abuse children or allowed children to be sexually abused. I have no reason to think otherwise, with all due respect.
Well, whether some bishops are better than others, I think the point here is that the only accountability is outside accountability. It's 16 years since the Globe Spotlight team published its report, and the church has done nothing, very little, almost nothing.
Well, let's talk about the man at the top. We pulled some quotes today. It's almost like Groundhog Day, and I'm sure you people realize it better than others. May 2016, this Pope Francis: we must not tolerate the abuse of minors. We must severely punish the abusers. A year and a half later, September of 17, the consciousness of the church arrived a bit late. Perhaps the old practice of moving people around and not confronting the problem kept consciences asleep. And then in August of this year, this is after Pennsylvania, obviously, we showed no care for the little ones. We abandoned them. The point you made a couple of seconds ago, Mitchell, is the one that I can't get over. If any other institution in the world had this level of sexual violence, criminality, corruption, it would be shut down without. This is a different animal, obviously, because it's a religious institution. So what should happen?
It's a different animal because it's so rich and powerful. The Catholic Church has trillions of dollars. They control lobbyists. They have 1.2 billion followers. They're so powerful that they can't be shut down. People always ask me, is the Catholic Church going to change? I say no. They're going to rewrite history in 100 years. So it was a bunch of crazy advocates who made this story about clergy sexual abuse.
But it's almost like, to me, like the Pope's trying to wait it out. His lines were, I'm not going to say one word. The document accusing me speaks for itself. Well, as a layperson, if the document speaks for itself, then you did ignore a warning about miscarriage. Is that not what
it's significant that he didn't deny it. I think that the public is so wary now, is seeing through all these speeches and commissions, even the meeting in February. That will only be significant if the Pope has taken significant action before that.
Are the charges against O'Malley and the Pope not credible? And we should say, I don't know if I made it clear before, there have been two allegations that Cardinal O'Malley was notified about abuse situations.
Right.
Theoretically, both were stopped by the same secretary. In his office, he denies having known about that. Are the charges credible against O'Malley and the Pope?
Well, I think what's important is that the Pope and O'Malley are losing credibility by the hour. I mean, it looks like Cardinal O'Malley had a system in place that would grant him plausible deniability whenever a meaningful complaint came into the Archdiocese. Now, suddenly now that he's been held to account, he's going to change his tune. That letter that went to his office about McCarrick was not written by just an average parishioner. The letter was written by a priest. If a priest can't get through, then who does? The answer might be no one.
So what happens now? I mean, I parroted an editorial. We talked about the response in the civil world, not in the church world. I parroted, I thought, a very good op-ed in the editorial in the Washington Post a couple of weeks ago in the air here, saying the church has spent millions fighting the elimination of statutes of limitations in these cases.
Still is.
And that it's time for them to drop that and actually support the elimination of statute of limitations. On my radio show a couple of weeks ago, a state senator from Massachusetts calls in from the cold. Her name is Lovely. She's the chief sponsor of the elimination of the criminal statute here. She was abused as a 6-year-old. Her 6-year-old twin brother was abused as a 6-year-old. Later on, he was abused by a priest. Obviously, that should happen. What else should civil authorities be pushing for while there's some momentum? And
they could do a national inquiry. They did this in Australia.
What does that mean, the Department of Justice?
Sure. Yeah. The Department of Justice could do a national inquiry into not just the Catholic Church, but child sexual abuse within all religious institutions in the U.S.
Rather than hoping state by state something happens?
Absolutely.
What else should they be doing?
Well, I think that's a good start, something like the model perhaps on the Royal Commission in Australia.
Yeah.
But, you know, there's some very obvious things that could happen. You know, the bishops in America have approved the Charter for the Protection of Young People and Children. Let's enforce it. You know, something else we haven't touched on is that the Pope's Blue Ribbon Commission on child sexual abuse, the Pontifical Commission, they met for 3 years and produced almost zero.
This is the thing O'Malley chairs.
This is the thing O'Malley chairs.
We're survivors. That I believe the 2 survivors are served there
Right.
resigned because they said they weren't doing even the most basic kinds of things.
Exactly. So we have Cardinal O'Malley meeting in Rome for 3 years and producing almost nothing. Why doesn't that Pontifical Commission have the ear of the Pope?
Why doesn't it?
You have to take, let me just say this, you have to speak the same language as the church.
Meaning?
Money. Take away their charitable status, and they will understand very quickly.
Based on what?
Based on the fact that they'll be losing billions
No,
of
no,
dollars.
no. I mean, what's
Based
the
on
basis?
the
They have a
fact-
charitable, they have, that because they're a religious institution, they're tax exempt. You're saying the federal government should decide what because of the corruption in the institution?
How is sexually molesting children and allowing the sexual abuse of molestation of children a charitable purpose? Explain that one to me.
You think that's doable, or that's just a
It's
rhetorical
something.
hope?
Well, what is doable? We have to try. If we don't try, we're not
Do you have
gonna
any
know.
hope about, I mean, you probably have as much contact with people who have suffered at the hand of the church of practically anybody on the planet. Do you have hope for the future at all?
Yes, because we're making the public aware that they have to protect their children. Is the church going to change? The church isn't going to change. Earlier this week, a woman called me, 84 years old. Hello, I was abused by a priest in Pennsylvania. Can you represent me? In 1940. Now, we're not hearing about cases from 1920 or 1910 because those victims have passed away. They're infirm.
And is it still going on?
Oh, without a doubt, of course.
Mitchell, thank you for your time and your work. Appreciate it. Ann, you as well.
Thanks.
And obviously you, Mike, too. Thank you so much. All three of you. Appreciate it.